5 researchers vanished into the Antarctic white, a place that promised discovery but delivered only silence. Until 12 years later, when a discovery born of pure chance changed everything. The final image was one of absolute joy. Dr. Aris Thorne, his face ruddy from the wind and framed by the fur of his parka hood, stood with his arm around his colleague, Dr. Lena Petrova. Behind them, Kenji Tanaka, Samuel Reed, and Dr. Evelyn Hayes were a jumble of bright red and orange against the impossible, sterile white of the polar plateau. They were smiling, their breath pluming in the frigid air, a tiny island of humanity in an ocean of ice. Aris had sent the photo to his wife, Clara, over the station's sluggish satellite link. The accompanying text was brief, crackling with an energy that defied the -40-degree temperature. Almost there. The preliminary data is off the charts. Something is down there, Clara. Something big. Love you. Love the little bean. Talk tomorrow at 1800 Zulu. Clara Thorne, 7 months pregnant and half a world away in a warm Seattle apartment, had smiled at the message. She saved the photo, tracing the outline of her husband's exhilarated face. The little bean was their name for their unborn son. Aris was the lead geologist on the expedition, a man whose passion for the Earth's secrets was matched only by his meticulous nature. He led the Persephone V team, a hand-picked group of specialists dispatched to a remote sector of the Vostok subglacial highlands. Their mission was to investigate a series of gravitational and magnetic anomalies that hinted at a unique geological formation trapped miles beneath the ice sheet. It was the culmination of his life's work. The next day, Clara watched the clock. 1800 Zulu came and went. The satellite phone on her counter remained silent. Her first thought was rational. Solar flares. Antarctica was notorious for disrupting communications. She waited an hour, her stomach a tight knot of anxiety. She told herself it was nothing. Aris was the most prepared man she knew. He planned for every contingency. A comms blackout was contingency number 1. But by 2000 Zulu, the rationalizations began to fray. The silence felt different. It was heavy, pressing. She remembered Aris's last words, something big. Her unease curdled into a specific, chilling dread. At 2200 Zulu, 4 hours past the scheduled check-in, she made the call. Her voice was steady as she spoke to the night-duty officer at the National Science Foundation's Polar Operations Center. She relayed the facts. The team's names: Thorne, Petrova, Tanaka, Reed, Hayes. Their objective. Their vehicle. A specialized tracked transport designated Icecrawler 7. The missed check-in. The man on the other end of the line was calm, reassuring. He promised to check the beacon data from the crawler and initiate contact protocols with McMurdo Station. The call ended, and Clara was left alone again with the silence, which now felt like a physical presence in her small apartment. Within hours, the gears of a massive, international apparatus began to turn. An emergency signal was broadcast from McMurdo. There was no reply. A long-range reconnaissance plane was diverted from its scientific survey flight. The pilots, flying high above the endless expanse, searched for the electronic pulse of Icecrawler 7's emergency locator beacon. They found it. The signal was steady, precisely where it was supposed to be, at the coordinates Aris had designated as their final survey point. But the beacon was programmed to activate automatically only in the event of a catastrophic vehicle failure or rollover. The fact that it was not active was initially seen as a good sign. It meant the crawler was likely intact. 2 days later, battling deteriorating weather, a pair of Twin Otter ski planes landed a few miles from the crawler's last known position. The first confirmation of the mystery came from the rescue team as they crested a low, sastrugi-carved ridge. Icecrawler 7 stood on the ice, perfectly level, its engines cold. The scene was eerily peaceful. There were no signs of a fire, no indication of mechanical failure. The vehicle was simply there, a dark metal scar on the pristine landscape, as if the occupants had parked it and walked away moments before. The side hatch was unlatched, but closed. The inside was orderly. Arcus and gear were stowed. Half-eaten ration bars sat on a small table. A digital tablet displayed geological survey data, the screen frozen mid-scroll. The vehicle's log showed that the engine had been turned off manually. The 5 researchers were gone. The search began immediately. It was a massive undertaking, a testament to the ironclad rule of the Antarctic Treaty. No one was left behind. A temporary command post was established. A small city of tents and equipment that bloomed on the ice, a fragile outpost against the continent's profound indifference. Rangers from the Antarctic Search and Rescue Team, arguably the most experienced cold weather specialists in the world, fanned out from the silent crawler. They were joined by volunteers from McMurdo and the nearby Amundsen-Scott South Pole Station. Canine units, their dogs specially trained for avalanche and crevasse rescue, were flown in. Helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft crisscrossed the sky, their crews scanning the uniform whiteness for any speck of color, any break in the pattern, any sign of human passage. The environment was not merely uncooperative, it was actively hostile. The search area was a featureless plain, a blank canvas where the wind was the only artist. Katabatic winds, rivers of cold, dense air pouring down from the polar plateau, scoured the surface with relentless force. These winds could erase footprints in minutes, burying any dropped equipment under feet of fresh concrete hard snowdrift. The landscape itself was a trap. Hidden crevasses, some hundreds of feet deep, lurked beneath thin, treacherous snow bridges. The temperature rarely rose above -30 degrees Celsius, and with the wind chill, it plunged to lethal levels. Every hour a human was exposed was an hour closer to death. Days turned into a week. The search grid expanded, a geometric pattern of futility laid over the chaotic wilderness. The teams were methodical, disciplined, and utterly defeated by the sheer scale and emptiness of the place. The most unnerving part was the complete absence of clues. They found nothing. Not a single footprint leading away from the crawler. The wind-scoured ice around the vehicle was as smooth and undisturbed as glass. They found no discarded glove, no dropped ice axe, no wrapper from a ration bar. It was as if 5 people had simply ceased to exist. The searchers checked and rechecked the crawler. They analyzed its communication logs, which showed no distress calls. They examined the scientific instruments, which were all functioning perfectly. They inventoried the emergency supplies. 5 sets of extreme cold weather gear, tents, and survival packs were missing. This suggested the team had left the vehicle willingly, prepared for an excursion on foot. But why? And in which direction? The lack of evidence became the central, maddening mystery. The continent held its secrets close, offering no answers. The mountains on the horizon watched, silent and ancient. The wilderness was not just indifferent, it felt withholding. After 3 weeks of intense, round-the-clock effort, the hope that had fueled the search began to freeze. The window for survival had long since closed. The mission shifted from rescue to recovery, a somber change in semantics that carried the weight of utter failure. Then, a flicker of what looked like hope. A communications analyst back in New Zealand, sifting through weeks of archived satellite data, isolated a faint, anomalous signal. It was a weak, intermittent burst, broadcast on an emergency frequency that had been picked up by a weather satellite 2 months after the team vanished. Its source was plotted to a remote region of ice ridges and glaciers, nearly 400 kilometers to the east of the abandoned crawler. The discovery energized the exhausted search command. A new theory quickly formed. Perhaps Eris Thorne, following his anomalous readings, had led his team on a long-distance trek. Perhaps they had encountered trouble far from their vehicle, and one of their personal locator beacons had activated, its signal too weak to be noticed until now. It was a plausible, if desperate, explanation. Resources were remobilized. A specialized long-range team was dispatched, a difficult and dangerous journey into one of Antarctica's most inaccessible areas. They spent 10 days navigating the treacherous terrain, their hopes dwindling with every kilometer. When they finally reached the signal's origin point, they found the source. It was not a personal locator beacon. It was a French meteorological buoy from the 1980s, half buried in the ice. Its aging electronics had malfunctioned, causing it to emit a corrupted, ghost signal on the wrong frequency. The lead was a dead end. The disappointment was a crushing blow, a physical weight that settled over everyone involved in the search. It was the final nail in the coffin of hope. The vast, empty continent had offered up a mirage, consuming precious time and resources, and then had snatched it away, leaving only the cold, hard truth of its own emptiness. With the Antarctic winter closing in, bringing with it perpetual darkness and unsurvivable temperatures, the large-scale search was officially suspended. The case of the Persephone V was moved from the active file to the cold one. The continent had won. In the vacuum of information that followed, a new and cruel public narrative began to form. With no evidence of an accident or foul play, speculation turned on the people themselves, and particularly on their leader. Eris Thorne was painted as a reckless obsessive, a man so driven by the pursuit of a discovery that he had pushed his team too far. Anonymous sources in media reports suggested he had ignored safety protocols, venturing into a dangerous area against advice. Whispers of a rogue mission circulated. Some even theorized a mutiny, a confrontation on the ice that had ended in tragedy for everyone. The narrative shifted from one of tragic loss to one of human error, casting a shadow of blame over the man who could not defend himself. His reputation, once stellar, was now tarnished by suspicion. Clara Thorne refused to let this stand. Her grief was a raw, open wound, but it was forged into a shield of defiance. She gave birth to her son, naming him Arthur, and in the quiet, lonely years that followed, she became the sole keeper of her husband's legacy. She fought the whispers and the cruel theories. She knew Eris. She knew his meticulousness, his unwavering commitment to the safety of his team. She established the Thorne Foundation, an organization dedicated to promoting safety in polar research and providing support for the families of scientists lost in the field. Her vigil was relentless. She kept the story in the news, doing interviews on the anniversary of the disappearance each year, her voice a steady, quiet counterpoint to the continent's roaring silence. She refused to let the world forget them. Hope, for her, was not a fire. It was a pilot light, a tiny, stubborn flame she shielded against the winds of time and public indifference, refusing to let it be extinguished. Years passed. 5 years. 10. The mystery of the Persephone 5 faded from public consciousness, becoming a cautionary tale told to new recruits at McMurdo Station, a ghost story of the ice. The world moved on. Clara's son, Arthur, grew into a boy who knew his father only through photographs and stories. The case was a frozen artifact, forgotten by all but a handful of people whose lives had been irrevocably fractured by it. 12 years after the vanishing, 2 graduate students from the University of Tasmania were conducting a drone survey over the Ninnis Glacier tongue, hundreds of miles from where the Persephone V had disappeared. They were documentary filmmakers, mapping the calving edge of the glacier for a project on climate change. It was their own unrelated mission, a pursuit of a different kind of truth. They were flying a high-endurance drone equipped with a high-resolution camera, skimming it low over a vast, chaotic field of crevasses and seracs. It was a landscape of breathtaking, violent beauty. One of the students, a young man named Leo, was piloting the drone, watching the feed on a monitor inside their heated tent. He guided the drone down into the mouth of a particularly wide, deep fissure, curious about the structure of the ice walls. As the camera descended into the blue twilight of the crevasse, something anomalous flashed across the screen. It was a flicker of unnatural color deep within the ice. Not the deep sapphire of compressed ice, but a flat, dull red. "Whoa, back up," Leo said, his voice tight with curiosity. He reversed the drone, ascending slightly and panning the camera. There it was again. Protruding from the wall of the crevasse, perhaps 200 feet below the surface, was an object. It was rectangular, its color faded, but unmistakably man-made. A piece of metal or plastic, entombed in the slow-moving river of ice. Their curiosity compelled them. They marked the GPS coordinates with precision, and upon their return to Casey Station, filed a report, including the drone footage. They assumed it was old scientific equipment, perhaps from an expedition decades ago, but protocol was protocol. The report landed on the desk of the station's science lead, who recognized the potential significance. The location was unusual, far from any known historical traverse routes. A specialized crevasse recovery team was assembled. Getting to the object was a high-risk operation. 2 climbers, roped together, abseiled into the frozen chasm. The air grew still and profoundly silent as they descended, the world shrinking to the beams of their headlamps on the crystalline walls. They found the object. It was a standard-issue Pelican case, the kind used to transport sensitive scientific instruments. Its hard-shell plastic was scarred and bleached by time, but it was largely intact, wedged tightly into the ice. It took them 2 hours of painstaking work with ice screws and axes to free it. As they chipped away the last of the ice, binding it to the wall, they noticed something else. Just behind the case, deeper in a recess, was a shape. A dark bundle, wrapped in the tattered remains of what looked like a survival blanket. With a growing sense of dread and awe, they worked to free this second object. It was heavy. When they finally pulled it from its icy tomb, they realized what they had found. It was not equipment. It was a human body. And it was not frozen solid. As they secured it for the ascent, one of the climbers brushed snow from the face. The figure's eyelids fluttered. The impossible had happened. The person was alive. The survivor was airlifted to the medical facility at McMurdo Station. A ghost returned to the world of the living. Identification was made through dental records and DNA. It was Dr. Evelyn Hayes, the biologist from the Persephone 5 team. She was suffering from severe malnutrition, profound hypothermia, and a form of cognitive dissociation brought on by years of extreme isolation and sensory deprivation. Her physical state was a medical marvel. Her story, however, was trapped behind a wall of trauma, emerging only in fractured, nonsensical whispers. The Pelican case found with her was carefully transported to a forensic lab in Christchurch, New Zealand. It was this case, not the barely living survivor, that would provide the first real clue in 12 years. Investigators expected to find rock samples or biological specimens inside. When the lab technicians opened the vacuum-sealed container, they found it was packed not with rocks, but with a dozen smaller, airtight vials. These vials contained samples of ice crystals and trapped atmospheric gases. The evidence was subjected to a battery of advanced scientific analyses. Isotope geochemists, atmospheric scientists, and cryologists were brought in to study the strange samples. They used mass spectrometers to analyze the composition of the gases and the isotopic ratios of the water molecules in the ice. The science delivered a conclusion that was utterly counterintuitive. The ice and gas samples did not match anything from the Antarctic surface. The ratios of noble gases like argon and xenon and the specific isotopes of oxygen and hydrogen in the water possessed a unique signature. This signature could only have been formed in a completely isolated subterranean environment, one that had been sealed off from the surface atmosphere for millennia. Furthermore, analysis of Evelyn Hayes's cellular degradation and the wear on her equipment suggested she had only been exposed to the harsh surface conditions for a relatively short time, perhaps a year or 2 at most. For the other 10 years, she had been sheltered. This was the paradigm shift. The Persephone V team had not died on the surface. They had not been caught in a storm while trekking across the ice. They had gone underground. The prevailing theory, the story of a reckless leader on a doomed surface expedition, was proven completely, fundamentally wrong. The discovery forced investigators to look at the case from an entirely new, unexpected angle. The question was no longer where they had walked, but what they had found beneath the ice. The investigation was officially reopened. It was handed to a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was Eris's older brother, a former military investigator who now worked as a private security consultant specializing in remote site logistics. He was a pragmatist, a man who dealt in facts, not theories, and he had been estranged from his more idealistic, dreaming brother. He had quietly accepted the public narrative of Eris's recklessness, a painful conclusion that had deepened the rift between him and his sister-in-law, Clara. Now, armed with this new, irrefutable scientific data, he re-examined his brother's work with fresh eyes. He flew to the NSF archives and unsealed Eris's research files, boxes of data that had been collected and dismissed as the work of a man whose ambition had outstripped his judgment. He spent weeks poring over geological surveys, satellite data, and his brother's cryptic, handwritten notes. He found what the original investigators had missed, or rather, what they had not had the context to understand. In the final weeks before the disappearance, Eris's logs were filled with references to anomalous geothermal readings and massive subglacial voids detected by ground-penetrating radar. He had mapped a colossal network of what he believed were caves, warmed by geothermal vents, miles beneath the ice sheet. His last entry, made just hours before the final photo was sent, was a single, triumphant line. "Found it. The entrance is stable." The pieces began to connect. Eris had not been on a rogue mission. He had been on the verge of the greatest geological discovery in modern history, a vast hidden ecosystem, sealed off from the rest of the world. The team had not abandoned their vehicle to trek across the surface. They had abandoned it to descend into the earth. Meanwhile, in a hospital in New Zealand, Evelyn Hayes began to speak. Her memory returned not as a fluid narrative, but in terrifying, crystalline flashes, like shards of ice. She spoke of a world without a sun, of vast caverns filled with strange bioluminescent fungi, of a freshwater lake warmed from below, and she spoke of a conflict. Her story was not one of natural disaster. It was one of human failing. According to Evelyn's fragmented account, the team had spent weeks exploring the cave system, ecstatic with their discovery. But as the magnitude of what they had found settled in, the unity of the team had fractured. Samuel Reed, the engineer, had grown increasingly paranoid and unstable. He became obsessed with the idea that the discovery was too dangerous to be revealed. He feared it would be militarized, exploited, destroyed by the outside world. He saw the unique extremophiles in the water, not as a scientific wonder, but as a potential bioweapon. He argued that they had a moral duty to seal the cave, to bury the discovery forever. Eris, Lena, and Kenji had vehemently disagreed. Their duty, they argued, was to science, to share this incredible new world with humanity. The confrontation happened deep within the cave system. Guided by Evelyn's fractured memories and Eris's rediscovered maps, Marcus Thorne led a new team back to Antarctica. They found the Ice Crawler 7, still sitting in the silent cold, a monument to a 12-year-old mystery. Following Eris's coordinates, they located the entrance to the cave system less than a mile away, hidden beneath a massive, overhanging snowdrift. It was a narrow fissure that descended into darkness. The team rappelled down into the earth. They found what Evelyn had described. The air was warmer, humid, and filled with the faint, earthy smell of life. The walls of the vast cavern glowed with a faint, blue-green light from phosphorescent moss and fungi. They found the team's base camp, set up near the shore of a vast, dark lake. And then, in a deeper section of the cave, they found them. The preserved remains of Eris Thorne, Lena Petrova, and Kenji Tanaka. They were not victims of an accident. Forensic evidence, collected at the scene, told the final, horrifying story. Samuel Reed, in his paranoia, had sabotaged their breathing apparatus while they slept. He had then attempted to seal them in that section of the cave by collapsing a narrow passageway with carefully placed charges from their geological survey kit. But his demolition was imprecise. He had sealed Eris, Lena, and Kenji in their tomb. He had also, however, triggered a much larger rockfall at the main entrance, trapping himself and Evelyn Hayes inside the larger cavern. Reed was killed instantly in the secondary collapse he had caused. Evelyn Hayes had survived. She had lived for a decade in that subterranean world, alone, with the bodies of her colleagues in a sealed chamber nearby. She survived on the emergency rations from their camp and the pure, geothermally filtered water from the lake. After years, the slow, grinding movement of the glacier above had finally sheared open a new exit to the surface, the crevasse where the drone had spotted her equipment case, which she had been trying to push to the surface as a signal. The full, tragic truth was laid bare. Eris Thorne was not a reckless fool. He was a hero and a visionary who had made the discovery of a lifetime. The public narrative, which had so cruelly tarnished his name, was corrected. The perpetrator, Samuel Reed, was brought to justice only by the truth. There would be no trial, no punishment beyond the judgment of history. For Clara Thorne, the revelation was a complex and somber form of closure. Her husband's name was cleared. His legacy was secured. But the knowledge that he had not been lost to the indifference of nature, but stolen by the paranoia of a trusted colleague, was a new and terrible kind of grief. It was a wound layered upon a scar. The discovery of the subglacial ecosystem was deemed too sensitive and potentially disruptive to be released to the public. It was classified at the highest levels by the Antarctic Treaty Consortium. The cave entrance was sealed, this time officially and permanently, its secrets once again entrusted to the ice. The story ended where it began, with a photograph. Clara sat in her quiet house, holding the image of the 5 smiling researchers. She looked at her husband's face, at the pure, unadulterated joy in his eyes. She finally understood the source of that joy, and the profound, heartbreaking tragedy of what was lost in that silent, sunless world beneath the ice. The relief of truth was real, but it was forever mingled with the sorrow of a life and a future that had been murdered in the dark. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.